Today on What's Next.
We're not saying in this book, agree with everybody, but listen to deepen your wisdom and your understanding of everybody.
Just be quiet for like 2 full minutes to listen to someone's story and then just say thank you.
How to get there, that deeper peace, is not letting the ego override.
Hello and welcome back to What's Next, the show that celebrates an entirely new life stage that holds the promise of extra decades of fun, meaningful life and provides all of us with multiple opportunities for a what's next in our own lives. I'm Mark Middleton, joined as always by this team of endlessly curious writers, storytellers, and journalists. We've got Bill Schaefer, Cecily Wilson, and Amy Sweezy. Hello to all. And I think it's fair to say that our combined slant on the future is incredibly optimistic, but relentlessly realistic. The opportunities of life do come with many challenges. Who among us foresaw, for example, the last 2 years, the social, the economic, the political upheaval, all of it in the midst of a pandemic? And I understand that producer Tim Killian, AKA Whiteboard Tim, has handed out whiteboards to all. So, Amy, what is the one word that you'd use to describe how these past 2 years have been?
My word is contemplation. I just think that, when we had all this time on our hands, it was time to figure out what's important, what matters, what can we cut out, and how do we actually spend our time.
Well, Mark, even though the last 2 years have been very difficult, the word I chose is challenging, because it's more about how we've had to react to it in order to get back to a new normal.
I'm going to say exhausting. That's the only word that I can think about is exhausting. Political, racial, pandemic, everything. Calgon, take me away.
It has been tough to pace ourselves over the past couple of years because, there really has been no shortage of stress and division and unfortunately even hate throughout the world, and which is why I wanted very badly to talk to a guy by the name of Tim Shriver. Tim is one of the good guys. He's the international head of the Special Olympics. He is a true leader of social change and the best-selling author of a new book called The Call to Unite, Voices of Hope and Awakening, in which he gathered the stories of some well-known writers, some celebrities, politicians, and true global thought leaders, all of whom share a message of unity. I recently spoke with Tim about his call to unite, even with those, and in fact, especially with those who have opposing views from our own.
Even in a tsunami of grief, you can't stop celebrating. Don't diminish the grief. But as T.D. Jakes says, go to the pain. And when we go to each other's pain, we actually find in each other the tender, the compassionate, the strong sense in which we are more at one than we are separate from one another. And that's, I hope, the message of the book. I'm crazy enough to think it's the story emerging in our country right now, but it just doesn't get play. So what gets play is hatred. What gets play is outrage. What gets play is violence. We're not saying in this book, agree with everybody, but listen to deepen your wisdom and your understanding of everybody. That's the way to advance principles, not hatred and outrage and disgust, which is too often how I think we see the means of changing. If we can just hate people enough, they'll change. Hatred and outrage doesn't work to change people. I think we know that.
Is there a takeaway to this moment in your life? Is there a broad strokes moral to the story of life that you've learned that you could perhaps share with us?
What the mystics say, we are already one. And right now, I do think in our country and around the world, people are looking for that sense of oneness. At the end of the day, have faith that we can build a future with more justice and joy. It's there, it's emerging, it's in front of us. There are as many voices as you hear telling you no. We're going to give you 100 voices that tell you yes. Yes, we can.
Man, do we ever need to hear those voices. I love Tim's perspective, but let's admit it is hard to do, especially in these difficult times. We all get so caught up in our own struggles that it becomes too easy to ignore others' pain. It's too easy to not listen, to not try to understand others' perspective. And of course, everything has just become politicized these days, which makes it even tougher to come together or to unite, as Tim Shriver says. So Bill, what do you think? Do you share his optimism? Is he being realistic? Can we actually come together? Can we learn to listen to others with different viewpoints? Can we avoid the hatred?
Here's the deal. When we think as a group, whether it's our party or our teams, that's where we get into trouble, because all we're doing is thinking about how can our side win? How can our team win? But almost any time you can sit down one-on-one with somebody and truly share, that's when you can relate. That's when you find common ground. That's when you realize that beneath it all, we are all the same and we all want the same things.
Yeah. You know, Cecily, your compassion, your empathy runs deep, but it's also just below the surface. I have seen you, cry on the air on this program and others that we've done, feeling the sadness, the hate that many of us experience. What have you learned in the last couple of years about empathy, about avoiding hatred?
That it's necessary. Empathy is necessary to our existence. Even just thinking about it right now over the last 2 years, it still gets very emotional for me, because I don't think I've ever seen our country so divided, so filled with anger and animosity. It's just been overwhelming. And I think when we have that level of empathy and understanding and get rid of the willingness to, I gotta win, it's me, then maybe, only maybe, can we really come together. But the empathy is definitely necessary.
Yeah, that whole, Cecily, what you said, I gotta win and that I have to prove I'm right. And I loved when he said that just because you listen to someone doesn't mean you agree with them. Right. You can have a conversation, a civil conversation, and be on two opposite sides, but still be friendly and kind and, hear each other with your two ears, and just remember you only have one mouth.
Agree to disagree, right? I mean, that's okay.
And it's easy for I'm giving us credit for being reasonable minds. It's easy for reasonable minds to agree to this kind of stuff. But I think we have to face it that social media has become far too complicit, a vehicle for spreading lies and mistruths. We all come to any conversation or any issue with an opinion, with a bias, and social media has become the great bias confirmation tool. It seems like truth really no longer carries the weight that it once did, because there's so many falsehoods out there right now that far too easily can masquerade as truth. This is where I get a little bit pessimistic. I love Tim Shriver's optimism. I hope it can all come together, but I don't know how we overcome the momentum of what's happening on social media these days.
One person at a time, right? My husband and I talk about this all the time. You're not going to change somebody's mind with your Facebook post. So just don't post it. All it does is stir up trouble and, tell everybody that you're on this side versus this side. And I don't know. I think social media is definitely a thing that we can fight by just looking at your own posts and saying, what is the point of this? What is my purpose? Am I building people up like we do at Growing Bolder? Am I building people up? Am I encouraging them? Or am I just trying to put people down?
Set a timer for yourself for 2 minutes and just be quiet for like 2 full minutes to listen to someone's story. And then people will say, are you listening to me? I'm like, I really am listening to you.
Welcome back to What's Next. Hey, did you hear me? We all hear a lot of things, but are we really listening? There's a big difference between hearing and listening. Turns out listening is something we could all do more of, because clinical psychologist and Yale professor Dr. Dietra Hawkins says it's the only way to have a meaningful dialogue and dialogue is the key to everything.
One of the things I often talk to people about is the difference between a dialogue and debate. When we are actually listening, one of the ways that we can help, like instead of asking a question about what someone said, we can ask them to share a story with us. We can ask them to say, so why is this so important to you? So I often refer to an approach called appreciative inquiry. Are we looking at what we have? And so do we listen with this inquiry base? Are we curious? Are we asking more about, so who is involved and when did that happen and how, are we getting excited about it? Or are we only looking at the problems? Are we only looking at what's missing in that person's story?
Sometimes when I listen, I'm trying to think of ways to relate to what they're saying instead of just shutting my mouth and
Yes.
focusing on what they're saying.
I love that. So if we could just be quiet. So one of our tips that we give people is to literally, all of us have our phones with us all the time, set a timer for yourself for 2 minutes and just be quiet for like 2 full minutes to listen to someone's story. And then just say thank you. Like,
Well, I'm
and
gonna write this
just
down.
nod. Like, you don't need to do anything more. And it's amazing what will happen. I've learned this even with my, my family members, that if I could just stop and listen, and then people will say, are you listening to me? Like, I really am listening to you. Like, I can give back like what they're saying, but it's really healing.
Dr. Dietra Hawkins with some fascinating points. We don't always listen. We're too busy getting ready to jump right back in there and just react. You saw me do it in the interview there. Now, not all of us, though. Cecily is a really good listener. And Cecily, were you always that way, or did you have to make like a conscious effort to do it?
Negative. No, absolutely. There's this little TikTok thing that's out there that says, listen, Linda, listen, right? And I think I've learned to be a great listener. As a journalist, you have to listen because it leads you into your next question when you're doing interviews. But also as an individual, as a mother, as a wife, you have to listen. And I've been told many times that in order to be a great leader, you have to be a great listener. So I listen. I hear you. I hear you, Bill. I hear you, Mark.
Isn't it funny, Cecily? We all shake our heads in agreement, but yet none of us do it. How about you, Amy? Can you tell when you're really locked in and listening? How do you get yourself to, focus?
Well, first, put down the phone. I think that's a really good advice. We all have it kind of right down here. Even if we're not looking at it, we're thinking about what's on the phone. But too often, we, and I mean me, listen to respond. Like, I ask a question about how was your day because I want to tell you about my day. Or I ask you, how was your dinner because I want to tell you all about my dinner, as opposed to just asking the question and just soaking in their response and listening to what they're saying and see what you can learn from it.
Such a great point. I'm guessing there are probably a lot more really good talkers in the world than there are listeners. Which do you think is more important, Mark? Which do you think is most valuable?
Well, we're a group of talkers, but to Cecily's point, we all have to learn how to listen. I find myself, when I'm involved in a conversation where there might be differences of opinions, being way too impatient. When I know what someone is trying to say and where they're going to go, I have to stop myself, and I don't do it well, from interrupting and saying, yeah, I get that, but. It's very difficult to let somebody finish their statement in the way that they want to when you know where they're going to go.
Just like me, you and everyone else just wants to be happy and doesn't want to hurt.
It might seem like a stretch to call Dr. Barry Kerzin an ordinary man, but I think he would disagree. He will, though, readily admit that he leads an extraordinary life. Kerzin is a medical doctor. He's a Buddhist monk, and here's the big part. He's the personal physician to the Dalai Lama, and he recently sat down with Growing Boulder's spiritual leader, Bill Schaefer, to discuss the biggest life lessons that he's learned and what he believes is the key to achieving inner peace.
How to get there, that deeper peace, inner peace, is through the shunyata, is not taking ourselves seriously, is not letting the ego override. When the ego gets too strong, and that's often the case, it's like pulling us by the nose, and it causes us to get too attached in an unhealthy way. It causes us to get too averse in an unhealthy way, frustrated, irritated, sometimes angry, polarized, losing respect for other people. And while that may bring harm to the other person or animal, it harms us tremendously. And so by being led by the nose, by the ego, gets us into all kind of misery.
Leave us with a takeaway. What can we learn from you about what's really important in life?
I'd have to say, number one, compassion. Number two, compassion. And number three, compassion. And I'd like everyone to remember this and put it into practice. Just like me, you and everyone else just wants to be happy and doesn't want to hurt. And so putting that mantra into practice, every time you meet someone, every time, virtual, in person, whatever, remember that. She or he, just like me, wants to be happy and not hurt.
Of course, compassion is really just the ability to walk in someone else's shoes, to show concern, to show kindness and understanding for the struggles of others. Shouldn't be that hard, including those who might have a different worldview than our own. So how do you think we get there? Or as Dr. Kerzin says, Bill, how do we not let our ego override?
Yeah, the trick, I guess, is very simple. The trick is that there is no trick. We actually just have to sit back and kind of care. You know, I've gotten to know him very well, Dr. Kerzin, from meeting him on several occasions and having some really interesting conversations. He looks like an alien from another planet, you know. He's very intimidating at first, and 2 minutes of talking to him, he's a regular guy. He's Barry from SoCal. It's once we get past all of these things that our minds tell us, well, he must be the Buddhist monk, or, you know, he's this direction or that direction, and you just relate to somebody as a person. That's what compassion is. Wanting to understand him. Why is he like that? What did he find so interesting about Buddhism? What did he find so interesting about being a medical physician? And where were the connections? Because really, when it comes down to it, except for the red robes, Mark, we're all pretty much the same. Welcome back to What's Next, and it's time now for us to listen to you. It's time for the Your Take social media question of the week. And here's what we asked. When you're struggling, how do you prefer to be comforted? And these are some of the answers from our social media sites. Rita says that she likes lyric-free music. You know, one of the most popular answers was go for a walk and get some exercise. And some people gravitated more towards food. Susan says a loaded pizza will comfort her every time. You know, some of our viewers said that really they just need space to process their own selves alone. But others like Kathy, Barbara, Deborah, and Mary, they said they need to be hugged when they're struggling. So let's start with you, Cecily. When you're struggling, how do you prefer to be comforted?
Well, Bill, I think it depends on what I'm struggling with. So kind of each time there's something a little different. Sometimes I just need some space if I'm struggling with something. Sometimes I need to go into my system of prayer. Sometimes I like to go shopping. It just depends on what I'm struggling with. But in all cases, I know I need help.
I usually need to talk it out, but I need to just talk it out with someone who I can vent with, not someone who's going to try to solve my problem.
Yeah.
Like I just need to bounce some things off of someone who can just kind of listen.
That's such a great point, but you know, and that's why maybe for me it's the physical touch, whether it's petting the dog, you know, or getting a hug or holding hands with your wife or something like that, just a touch on the shoulder. Sometimes it's enough to let you know that there is somebody else there and it's going to be okay. Mark?
It really is a great question. Who doesn't want to be asked how they like to be comforted? You know, I like to be reminded, and I do remind myself that everything is going to be okay, that change and struggle are part of life, that this too shall pass, because ultimately it always does. And, at times an important part of getting to the opportunity of what's next is simply being able to handle what's now. And while there are many great strategies to help us with that, it is the help and the support of others that I think is most important. And ultimately, as we've learned today from multiple people, it takes compassion for others to offer that support. So think about that, reach out and help when you can, and we'll see you right back here next time.